Thank you, Paul. What do we do after the waters recede and we have all these seeds, and why do we think the waters will recede?
Is that on?
It's on.
I think one of the things that we can do is buy ourselves time.
Sure.
You know, this was often, as you know, previously I led the Millennium Seed Bank for 9 years and that program, and one of the arguments that we always got, and I think one of the misconceptions about seed banks was that we're putting them away for 200 years. There's some element of truth in that, in the sense that that is an option, but ideally seed banks are used now. Or as soon as we're able to put them back into a landscape when we know that the threat has been addressed or that we can manage that threat. And that's why in the second phase of the seed bank we introduced this idea of making sure that the major component of our work was enabling this human innovation, adaptation and use, not just in habitat restoration but also in agriculture, horticulture and forestry, the way that humans use plant-dominated landscapes now. So, you know, I think that is a fundamental strategy. There is another argument for orthodox seeds at least, and Chris will talk about the more difficult or recalcitrant taxa, and that is that we should do this while we can, and also because we can. Now, based on the Millennium Seed Bank costs, it costs $2,000 US on average to bank the seed of 30,000 seeds of a species. Why wouldn't we do that? And while we have the opportunity to do that. And I think we can buy ourselves time, give future generations potential options while we get ourselves sorted out. And as I get older, like the rest of us, I despair sometimes about us ever sorting ourselves out, but surely that must happen soon. And I do feel that we are coming close to a watershed with that. I'm hopeful, at least, with climate change at the forefront and then biodiversity coming behind.
From your mouth to God's ears. If we don't save it now, we won't save it later. Any other comments or questions? Yeah, Marcello.
Thank you. Congratulations. Very nice talk. But I want to ask, what is the relation between the gardens and the population? Because, for example, in Amazonia, the foundation that preside Vienna have a very interesting relation, and understand that it's very important that the people live in the gardens, we can say, with the awareness that this is the future to conserve the biodiversity. In the contrary, the gardens, if not have some relation intensive with the local population, for example.
Absolutely. I think that's a really important question, and the big advantage that we have in dealing with plants is that we can connect into local communities through agriculture, through agroforestry, through the gardens, the ornamental gardens as well. And actually the new model for botanic gardens in developing countries are very much around using those gardens as resources for development. So that might be agroforestry, it might be ecological restoration. So for example, I was talking to Virgilio, yes, in Africa we have helped to establish 2 botanic gardens in East Africa which are exemplars for agroforestry and for ecological restoration. That is their sole purpose. And people come to see what they can grow. They come to buy seedlings and saplings and to learn through the training courses how they can grow a wider range of plant diversity, including medicinal species that they have traditionally collected from the wild which are no longer available, and other useful species. So I don't think we must not think of botanic gardens simply in the Western model, although it's interesting that, of course, Western botanic gardens started out very much as medicinal gardens and around economic botany. We need to get back to that to connect with people who grow plants.
Thank you. Any other comment? Yep.
I'd just like to follow up on this question of Marcelo and your response about having botanical gardens with a different look in developing countries. I think this is really a very good point, that botanical gardens have to have a different design in developing countries so that they become more demonstration sites for sustainable production systems, and that is largely around agroforestry systems with a high species diversity. So I think this could be an interesting message from this meeting, that botanical gardens engaged in sustainable production systems should be encouraged and multiplied around the world. I think that simple message should be a part of our conclusions.
That's a good comment, and I think it's very true in the United States also, and I presume probably in Europe, as we heard about zoos, that our gardens are increasingly concerned with sustainability too, with demonstrations of sustainability. And there's a growing movement in the United States that our gardens should be concerned somewhat with agriculture also, because like most parts of the world, we have a massive separation between urban dwellers and rural agriculturists, and we need to understand one another to make this system work. So I totally concur with that point.
Could I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Paul, looking at the 503 trees, any comment on the systematic underlying factors which led to their endangerment? Why these, where, and how?
Yeah, largely it is through land use change, so clearing, but there are also climate is already having an impact, so we're increasingly needing to translocate rather than reintroduce. You'll also find that many species, for example, that are on islands, whether those are, and actually many of those critically endangered against the D criterion species are on tropical islands. They have nowhere to move to. They are in refugia already. The same if they're on the tops of mountains. And this again is where botanic gardens can help, because we grow them outside. We can work out what are their optimal conditions climatically, soil, and so on. So it's applying the science there is extremely important in understanding the horticology of those species. So there's a whole range of factors. Plant pests and diseases, those are a major emerging threat which is exacerbated by climate change and also by humans. And the fact that we move around so much and carry these things with us. Those are the major threats.
Over the last 500 years, world commerce has spread those diseases and those alien plants and other things. And you might also add gathering for commercial purposes or for medicine or something, which is driving a lot of them. Yeah. But agriculture, if you include grazing, occupies about 40% of the ice-free land in the earth, and that alone and the spread of agriculture means the destruction of a lot of biodiversity. But I wanted to make the analogy, we were talking about Belt and Road Project. Think of the area of oil palms in tropical Asia, which are mostly grown for the United States and Western Europe, and what growing those oil palms has meant to the extinction of species in what is probably biologically the richest part of the world. And we really do need to think about that. The European Union is beginning to think about that. The corporations are beginning to think about that, but money somehow seems to emerge pretty readily.